Hello and welcome to Blue Flag Garage. Today we're riding the 2020 Kawasaki Ninja 400, and today we're going to be going over the absolute worst thing about this bike. Now, I just bought this bike last week. It's brand new from the dealership. It's got 66 miles on it, and this bike has been touted as best in class, best beginner bike. There's a lot of positives about this bike, but there's something that I don't see a lot of people talking about, which really makes this bike kind of a chore in the first couple weeks, months of ownership. And that's the fact that there's a break-in period. Now, I know everyone has different opinions about break-in periods, but according to Kawasaki's recommendations, for the first 150 miles, we have to keep this bike under 4,000 RPM. So that means, you're really not unlocking any of this bike's true potential. Now, on one end of the spectrum is the conservative, keep everything under 4,000 RPM, and there's the other group of people who decide that they're going to drive it like they stole it, or essentially ride it how they would ride it normally. If that means you're racing it, and you're racing it from day one. You pull off the dealer lot, you hit red line, and you just call it a day. I chose not to do that. I'm going to go with the Kawasaki recommendations for a few reasons. One, I'm not an engineer, I don't profess to be. And Kawasaki probably has a lot of talented engineers on their team which have decided that this conservative approach is the best way to break in the bike. Now, the big downside of that is the fact that you're going to be very, very bored with this bike, because even at 4,000 RPM in 6th gear, this bike reaches about 40 to 42 miles an hour. Of course, it's also going to depend on your weight, a couple other contributing factors, whether or not you had a big breakfast that day, all kinds of things. But given that this bike is relatively low down on power, I know other places in the world are like, oh man, 400 cc's, I have to wait years and go through a sequential licensing system to reach that level. So here in the United States, we have the benefit of being able to get your motorcycle endorsement on your driver's license, and you can go out and buy a Turbo Hayabusa and eat yourself off into the shadow realm. However, there's a lot of other things that come up when it comes to the fact that you have to break this bike in. I'm not a proponent of, doing the whole drive it like you stole it thing. I tend to keep this bike for a long time, and when the warranty is going to expire or anything like that, or I get bored with it, I'll turn it into a track weapon, because I think it's more fun to make a slow bike go fast than it is to just buy a fast bike, and that may be beyond your skill level. So it's a great bike to develop your skills on. It's a great beginner bike. It's a great final bike if you've been riding for a while and you're older, and you just don't, you want a motorcycle to have fun on and commute with, but don't want the sort of extra responsibility of something like a leader bike or the aggressive ergonomics of other bikes. This might be a good sport bike option that's comfortable for you. So as you can see here, if you can tell on my dash, we're cruising at we're going uphill, but 37 miles an hour, about 3750 RPM. So you're not going to be breaking any land speed records or setting any record 0 to 60 times on this bike anyway, but right now, under the break-in period, which again is for the first 150 miles, this bike feels pretty boring, which is a shame, because other than the speed, it does feel normal, feels very nimble. It's got decently good ergonomics. Again, that's going to be more dependent on your size and your proportions, but I'm about 6 foot and 32-inch inseam, and it fits the bike. I feel comfortable on this bike. I may change the handlebars, but other than that, feet position is okay. So here we are, 6th gear, 4,000 RPM. We're hitting 41 miles an hour. Let's see if I get into a full aerodynamic tuck. There we go, 42 miles an hour. Oh man, we're cruising now. So the only issue with this bike is the break-in period. At least the only issue I have with it so far. I obviously haven't owned the bike for a long time or put many miles on it, but everything else seems very, very good. And yeah, so after 150 miles is the second break-in period, which lets us go to 6,000 RPM for the next 100 miles. And then after you reach 250 miles using that break-in procedure, it says to ride moderately until the first service, which is at 600 miles. So if you want to see my journey with this bike, I suggest subscribing and with notifications enabled. Throw me a like and all that good stuff that helps the YouTube algorithm. And we'll be going all of that, how to do your own first service. If you're a beginner motorcycle rider, we'll go over some tips and tricks. We'll be customizing this bike, talking about slip-on exhaust, full exhaust systems, tail tidies, all that fun stuff. So if you want to see more content about this bike, or if you want to see more content about bikes in general and all things motorsport, then definitely subscribe. But this is kind of my once a day go around in the neighborhood, try to keep it to roads that have speed limits between 25 and 45 miles an hour, because the bike can't do much more than that. And if you are planning on buying this bike as a commuter bike and you have to go on the highway and reach highway speeds, you're not going to be able to properly do the break-in period on this bike, because it just doesn't have the power at 4,000 RPM. At 4,000 RPM, I think you're making close to 15 horsepower. I'll throw up some dyno charts, and essentially, you know, at 4,000 RPM, you probably have a third of power of this bike. It makes most of its power in the top end. You probably have, I don't know, about half the torque rating, maximum torque of this bike. So you're really not going to be driving around quickly, and definitely not be able to reach highway speeds. So that's a little bit unfortunate. Similar break-in period, a more powerful bike, 4,000 RPM on a 600 or 750 cc bike would probably get you up to highway speeds. But this bike is not going to. So just enjoy your rides around the neighborhood, and do vary your RPM. So some people see that 150 mile first break-in service and they say, oh, okay, well, let's see, 4,000 RPM gets me to 40 miles an hour, so I can just hold it there at 4,000 RPM, 40 miles an hour on a long stretch of road, and keep going back and forth for a couple hours and get to that 150 mile mark. But that's really not what you want to do. You want to be varying the RPMs, going through all the gears, shifting all the gears, making sure that you roll on, roll off the throttle. Engine braking is recommended, which means downshifting to slow down. Definitely still use your brakes when needed, front and rear, because the brand new brake pads will have also a little bit of a break-in period. But as far as the engine goes, yeah, I mean, we're just kind of cruising around the neighborhood for doing laps and laps and laps until we hit 150 miles. Then we can take it up to 6,000 RPM, keep doing the same thing for another 100 miles, and then, maybe not redline it until the first service, because the idea with the break-in period is that you're going to have essentially a new engine, right? So those parts have to wear, and they have to mesh together, essentially. And the engine oil is probably being and collecting a lot of those metal particles of the different metal on metal parts that are rubbing against each other. And the first oil change, your filter should catch most of it, but after your first oil change, you want to change your oil at 600 miles during the first service in order to get rid of all that just normal break-in wear that happens in the engine. Another recommendation that we'll be going over when we do the 600 mile service on this bike, which I'll walk you through the whole thing so you don't have to take it to the dealership and waste your hard-earned money and spend money on better things like better sounding exhaust, because the exhaust sound on this bike is fairly mild. Had to stop a little quickly there. The brakes work, which is good. So yeah, all those metal particles and shaving during the break-in period, they're all gonna end up in your oil, which will be changed. And what we'll do during the first service is install a magnetic drain plug, which will also help. In addition to the filter, the smaller particles that still get through will be caught by that magnet, and we can prevent them from circulating around the engine to extend the engine's life. So we'll be going over all the mods, all the tips and tricks on this bike, and just thanks for joining me during my kind of boring rides around the neighborhood here. But if you want to break in the bike properly, this is how to do it. So why do you hear people online always talk about, oh, just forget the manufacturer recommendations? I had a bike that I took off the lot and took it to the track the first day, and it's been fine, and I've had it for 10,000 miles with no problems. Well, it's a little bit of anecdotal evidence, and remember that Kawasaki is going to recommend what's best for most bikes. They're covering all their bases when they come to the grand scheme. So if you do have some sort of issue with your bike, if you bought a lemon, which does happen, Kawasaki reliability is fairly good from what I hear. But if you do buy a lemon, then it probably isn't the best idea to take this bike up on the highway top speed in case you have a catastrophic engine failure or something. because you'll be going at a high speed, and that's a safety issue. And a lot of people kind of quote that safety issue from Kawasaki, say, oh, this bike is targeted toward beginner riders, and they just want you to go real slow because they don't want to have the reputation of a lot of people getting hurt on their motorcycles. So they keep a super conservative break-in period, especially because a lot of new riders are the demographic for this motorcycle. Well, to that I counter the fact that earlier in 2019, Kawasaki actually made the break-in period less conservative. So if they worry about safety, they would have kept the old, more conservative break-in period. And I'll put a comparison or a note from Kawasaki on here, and it said it even applied to retroactively to other bikes from 2008 that are new. So if you found some old dealer stock of 2018, sorry, not 2008, 2018 bikes. So they retroactively made the break-in period less conservative. So if they were truly worried about safety and all that stuff, then they would not have done that. They would have kept the old conservative break-in period. But essentially, cruising around town, using engine braking. I'm not even using the brake here. I'm just going down through the gears. Come to a stop. And do realize you are going to be slow away because you're not really getting to that high torque part of the torque curve on this bike. So the acceleration is not going to be what it's going to be when you are done your braking period. So just be careful of people coming up behind you. You have to be a little bit more conservative in your riding. But it does give you a chance to get used to the ergonomics of the bike, how it handles. I mean, it's a very nimble motorcycle. It's very light as far as motorcycles are concerned. The rider probably makes up 50% of the total weight of the bike and rider. So yeah, I mean, just have fun with it. Get to know the controls, get to know where your lights are, your turn signals, turn signal cancel, start stop, all that good stuff. Kill switch, brake, clutch, especially if you're a new rider. If you're coming from the MSF course, the Motorcycle Safety Foundation course here in the United States, a lot of states offer it at a fee, or their driving schools, or some states even offer it for free. And at the end of that course, you actually are given your license, but you have to realize that the bikes that you use, that they train you on, are usually things like 250cc, sometimes the Honda Rebel, which is a more cruiser style. So if you're not used to a sport bike, more aggressive riding position, not to say that this bike is super aggressive on its riding position, it's quite comfortable for a sport bike. But if you're coming from that, it is going to take a little bit of getting used to just the ergonomics. All the fundamentals are the same, balancing, all that kind of stuff, going through the gears, clutching, trail braking, all that good stuff. But it does take, every bike is different, and it takes its learning curve. So just enjoy the time, as boring as it may be, as I just drive around in circles on low speed limit roads, as to not piss off other drivers, because they'll see you and they'll say, usually motorcycles are flying by and they're complete, jerks on the road, and here's this guy going super slow. So if you want, maybe put on some extra high-vis clothing, or I know in other countries there's a big L on the bike for learner, so they actually have little plates and signs to designate that you're a learner. But again, in the United States, that's not the case. So just be cognizant of other drivers. You should always be cognizant of other drivers and act as if they don't see you, because most of the time they're not really paying attention to motorcycles or being able to judge motorcycle speeds as they would a car. Bikes are not as popular of a mode of transportation in this country as in other countries, where the fuel economy is better and where gas is more expensive than here in the United States. So people aren't used to necessarily seeing too many motorcycles on the road. But here I am rambling on about the braking period. I've put another 6 or so miles on the bike, just keep doing these laps around the neighborhood. But again, thanks for tuning in. This is Blue Flag Garage. Again, we're going to be talking about this bike. We're going to be talking about all kinds of other stuff. There's all kinds of anything motorsport related going to be on this channel. So I really appreciate if you made it to the end of the video and you like the content you see. Throw me a like, shoot me your comments. Are you going to break in the bike like it's prescribed? Or are you going to race it like you stole it? I'd love to hear some feedback. And don't forget to enable notifications. There'll be a lot of different content coming on this channel. Things to look forward to in the future. We're going to install a tail tidy kit, which I think is going to again, it's a cosmetic change, but we're not going to make any performance changes to this bike until we break the first break-in cycle, so 600 miles. We're not going to add any performance modifications, but we will be doing a lot of performance modifications once we hit that 600 mile first service. So we're going to do a little tail tidy, add a couple of little cosmetic changes to the bike. Nothing that affects performance. We're going to walk through the first service so you can save yourself a lot of money at the dealership. And yeah, and then after that, after the break-in period, we're going to start adding all kinds of performance modifications to the bike, possibly turn this into a little bit of a track weapon, not a full track with the, you know, race fairings and all that stuff, but we will go to try and get as much out of this bike as possible. So a lot of exciting things coming up in the future. Would love if you join me for the adventure. And if you have any suggestions or any comments, again, leave them down below. What would you like to see? I can answer questions about this bike and my limited experience. I have been riding for a while. This is not my first bike, but I got it for a couple different things. Commuting bike, great on fuel economy. Right now, during my time around the neighborhood, looks like I'm getting 58 miles to the gallon. So a commuter bike, getting some performance out of it, maybe taking it to track. Lots of fun stuff in store. So that's my long-winded way of saying thank you for being here. And until the next one, happy riding.